Edgar Allen Poe's The Black Cat is a great story. It's one of my favorites. It was actually the first story of his I ever read, and I was hooked from the moment I read this. It's a sad story, like most of Poe's stories. It also has a lot of gothic elements in it, again, like most of his stories, which would explain why we consider him the father of gothic literature. Some of the gothic elements are fear, omens and curses, atmosphere, and of course the supernatural. He also included elements that he has in many of his stories, like walling people up. And we also can't forget that he put in elements of his own life, like his love for cats and his love for alcohol. The Black Cat is told to us through an unnamed narrator. He tells us that from infancy, he was a gentle-hearted man who really loved animals. He married at a young age, and he was happy to find that his wife really was of the same mindset as him, and she wanted to keep them happy with lots of pets. So she got them birds, goldfish, a dog, some rabbits, a small monkey, and a cat. The cat was large, beautiful, really intelligent, and jet black. His wife liked to dabble in superstition, and she pointed out that black cats are known to be witches in disguise. But the narrator knows his wife was only half serious about that. She didn't really get into superstition that much. He names his black cat Pluto. Now, the planet hasn't been discovered yet, so I can only assume Pluto is from the Roman god of the underworld, whose job it was to help people to the afterlife. The narrator tells us he's the only one who feeds Pluto. They loved each other. Pluto followed him around the house and sometimes even around the street. Their happy lives went on for years like this. But over time, the narrator says that his mood started changing and he started to be kind of mean. He took out his aggressions on his wife and their pets, except for Pluto, who he still really loved. But as time went on, his mood started getting worse, and Pluto started getting older, and we all know with older cats they can be a little bit mean. This caused the man's feelings towards Pluto to kind of change. And it got really bad this one night when the man had been out drinking, and he came home just drunk as a skunk. He saw Pluto and he wanted to pet Pluto, but Pluto was a little bit cautious about being around him at this point. So he snatched Pluto up to force Pluto to be friendly with him. And if you've ever had a cat, you know if you try to force a cat to do something he doesn't like, he can lash out, which Pluto did. He bit the man. Now, for most of us, when our cats bite us, we just kind of toss them to the ground and say kind of mean things, and then check to make sure that we're not bleeding. No, that's not what our narrator does. Instead, he takes a pocket knife out of his waistcoat, and he sort of separates Pluto from one of his eyes. Then the narrator goes to bed to sleep off his intoxication. In the morning, when he wakes up, he discovers what he had done, and he's half horrified and half guilty for it. But he says that his soul remained untouched. The cat slowly recovered from the injury, but their relationship was never the same. As you can imagine, the cat really didn't want to be around him anymore and kind of spent more time with the wife. At first, the man's guilt was just overpowering for what he had done, but over time, that guilt turned to anger, and he started to resent the cat and hate the cat. He said his feelings changed to irritation and perverseness. Eventually, he sunk to some kind of depth that where he really wanted to do something wrong, even if it was just for wrong's sake. So one morning, he grabbed up Pluto and a rope, and he went out to a tree where Pluto was left dangling from the tree. That night, he was sleeping and he was woken up by a fire that was engulfing his house. So he and his wife get out of the house. I don't know if the pets got out. The narrator never really tells us. The next day, he goes back to the house to inspect it and discovers that it's completely destroyed. The walls had all collapsed, save for one, which was a wall that his headboard for his bed butted up against. And he noticed that some people were, like, collecting in front of this wall. So he looks, and what he finds is this picture on the wall of a cat. Large cat, kind of like Pluto, and a rope. So he comes to the conclusion that, we all probably would at this same point, is that somebody must have come across the fire, saw the cat dangling at the tree, and picked it up and threw it into his house through a window to try to wake him up. And as the cat smacked up against the wall, the plaster on that wall was fairly new. It had been replastered very recently. And so it may not have set yet, and the cat got embedded into the plaster of the wall. And when the fire broke out, because the wall was still fairly new and everything, that the wall wasn't able to, it was sort of like fireproof. As you can imagine, for months, this sort of haunted him. But then he started to feel better about his life, and his mood started changing, so he started to think maybe he could get another pet, a little bit like the cat he once had. He looked for one, but really couldn't find one, until one night he was in his den, drinking, of course, and through the bottles of gin and rum that littered the den, he saw a black figure, and he went up to it and discovered a cat was there. Much like Pluto. It was a black cat, large, seemed friendly. The biggest difference was that it had a white patch of some sort on the underbelly, and Pluto was jet black. He thought, hey, this is the pet I've been looking for, so he and his wife adopted the cat. The next morning, when he was sober, he discovered that the cat was even more like Pluto than he realized the night before when he was drunk, because the cat, too, had only one eye. The narrator thinks that this actually endeared the cat to his wife more, but more and more he became unhappy with the cat. He really thought that he was going to love the cat and be more like his relationship with Pluto, but to his surprise, the more the cat loved him, the more he hated the cat. Also, as time went by, that white patch on his belly started to change and move. Eventually, it became a mark around his neck. He longed to get rid of this cat. I guess just putting it out and not feeding it anymore wasn't good enough. He had to do something else. But his guilt towards what happened with Pluto just kind of kept him from doing that. So the cat stuck around, and his mood got worse and worse and worse. And his poor wife bore the brunt of his bad attitude. One day, he had to go to the cellar to do some work or something, and his wife decided to follow him down and help him. And as they were going down the stairs, the cat got up underneath his feet, something cats are wont to do. He almost fell head first down the stairs because of the cat, and he was so angry at that cat for that at this point he had no idea really what he was doing. He grabbed an axe and he lifted that up and he started to bring that down. But his wife stopped him. She grabbed that axe and stopped him. But he was so far gone that he was not going to be stopped for anything. He yanked that axe away from his wife, and he came down with that axe, not on the cat. He introduced the head of that axe to his wife, to her brain. At this point, he wasn't sure what to do. He couldn't, tell anybody, and he couldn't remove the body from the house, so he started looking around trying to figure out what to do. And he realizes that there's a false chimney in the cellar. So he dismantles the false chimney, and he places his wife in there, and then he rebuilds the false chimney. He does a really good job. He's very proud of himself for this good job he did with the wall. And then he turned his attention to the cat. But he didn't see the cat. So he slept that night pretty well for somebody who just did something that horrible. The next day he looked for the cat, couldn't find it. Looked for the cat the next day, couldn't find it. So he's decided, okay, the cat's gone. Thank goodness the cat is gone. I am rid of that thing. Okay, so I'm rid of my wife too, but the cat's gone. That's the most important thing. People around town started wondering, what happened to his wife. But he was certain there was no way anybody's going to figure this out. So he went on with his life and was happy. But about 4 days after his wife became missing, the police showed up without any warning. For some people, this might be a little concerning, but for the narrator, it was not, because he was absolutely certain that he had covered his tracks. So he gladly let them in the house, and they asked if he would walk around with them as they searched the house, and he was happy to do that. His heart, he said, was just calm as could be. They go down into the cellar, and they walk around the cellar, and they didn't find anything. And so they were getting ready to leave. They started to walk up the stairs when the narrator couldn't really help himself, because he was just so impressed with what he had done and that he was getting away with it, that he had to stop them and tell them some weird thing about how great this house is built, and it's built really sturdy. It's a great built house. And to prove it, he takes the cane that he had in his hand and he taps the wall. Happens to be the wall of the false chimney. And so he taps it, and to everyone's surprise, the wall returns the knock. It was not a knock. It was a scream. A horrible, horrible, horrifying scream. The man, he jumped to the other side of the room in fear. The cops on the stairs, they paused in shock. But after a minute, the cops ran down to that wall and started tearing it apart to see what was behind it. And when they tear it apart, they see the man's wife, most of her, just standing there. I mean, not really standing there, but leaned up against the wall. And the man is utterly shocked, not by the wife, but by what was on her head. What was on her head? This black creature with one red eye. It was the cat. He somehow walled up the cat with his wife. And he tells us a story while he's on death row. He tells us that tomorrow he will meet the hangman, but tonight he was going to unburden his soul.